So, it seems to be recording now. Excellent. Hey guys, this is Joel. Don't have to forgive me, I haven't actually done this a lot. What I'm trying to do is make a case for keeping the core system very simple. I'm trying to make a case for the elements that I think should be in it, and then, why we should do that, what should be in there, and that's basically the whole purpose of this. I feel like we all kind of, I've been I sent out a ton of emails recently, like with minor changes in a lot of them, and I think that we might not all be on the same page anymore. So the real big purpose of this is that we're really close to actually releasing something, and we need to get our heads together and make project goals and have jobs and a timetable to make that happen. So the big thing, I'm just trying to be Cap here a little bit, and get everybody together and get us all on the same page as far as the rules design, and yeah, just kind of give you guys a little bit of insight into why I'm doing this. My intent is to either send this via email. It might be too big for that. I may have to post it on YouTube. I'm hoping to do like a private channel where just you guys can watch this. But if this also might double as a really good viral marketing thing. I know one of the things that really sold me whenever I was investing in Legends of the Woolen was Eric did a series of YouTube videos, which are basically him looking at the camera. His are much more dignified. He had all of his library books behind him. I had a wall. But otherwise, he seemed like he knew what he was talking about, and he had some really cool ideas, and the way he presented them sold me on the system. So this might actually be very useful to do just in general to do that too. So initially it's going to be a little private run just for us, and maybe eventually this will be like a big public thing we'll use as part of our marketing. Because this is the ideal kind of marketing. People because GMs buy games and GMs go to game forums. And that's kind of the way my path led. I'm gonna do a video after this one about some strategies I've thought up and the idea of the business model. Because I've got some really solid building blocks for it, but I want to make sure everyone's cozy with a role and what our business is gonna look like and stuff like that. So there's gonna be some more. If this winds up working, and it's experimental, it might not, but should it wind up working, then I'm going to do that too. Anyway, so I don't really have a speech or anything prepped, but as a GM, of course, I have some notes. So, the core system. Right now, the very most basic bedrock is the stuff that we lifted wholesale out of Legends of the Woolen and Legends of the Gods, which is the die pool and the set matching mechanic. It's been brought to my attention in the playtest that David ran that there seemed like there was a lot going on in the character sheets, and so it could get kind of confusing. I don't think that's that. It's not something I've experienced in the way I ran it, and I have the advantage of being the game designer and kind of having thought of ways to represent it all visually as it goes, on the sheet and as it happens to play. So the way I did at my table, and this helped us a lot, is we would roll our action tools like so. And we would just arrange them from smallest number to largest. Let me see what I got here. I got 5, I got 2, I got some 1s. Wow, I got 3 1s this time. That's badass. That's a really good roll, actually, for 6 dice. Okay, so this took me, maybe 5 seconds, and I already know what my turn's going to look like, at least in a general sense. You'll note I've got 2 axes here. I've got smallest facing to largest facing, and then with multiples of the same facing, in this case 1s, they move vertically. That little visual reminder immediately tells you and all the other players at the table, because the GM should be doing this openly too, the shape of these people's abilities. Oh, that guy's got a set of 3, this is going to be a badass turn. Oh, that guy's got a lot of sets, that's going to be mean. That guy rolled a string of just 1s and 2s, so he is really powerful on the defense right now. It's probably going to take a more supportive role. You're going to know that after the dice hit the table, and it's going to be visually apparent to you really quickly. That's the way of keeping things kind of clean. That's probably my smoke alarm. I don't forget about that. It's actually just dying. I need to get some batteries. So, that was a good way of saving table space. The other thing that saves table space is with the prana, the chakra and their prana pools, we would just use beads. These are little glass beads. I got them at Walmart for like $1 for 1,000. I don't know if, I mean, like, they're not really a game shop thing in so much. In game shops, you usually see counters for collectible card games and things like that. But I think something along those lines, either counters or something like that, would be a nice, easy way to represent how much prana you have left in your shopper pool. Like in this case, this guy, let me see what we got for him. 3, he's at 6. So he's got a little bit left in his pool there. The other way, of course, you can do it is the way my wife does tracking her life in Magic the Gathering, which is, I'm going to come back to Magic a lot, so I hope you guys are conversant with it. If not, look it up, Magic the Gathering. There's a lot of really solid game design on it. And actually, the guy who made it, Richard Garfield, did some little webcast thing on YouTube that was actually him making a speech to a college class about game design. So that's really worth your time to check out, too, if you happen to have, an hour or so. Anyway. But what you do is you just do one for the tens column, one for the ones column. In this case, this guy would have 6, so the tens column would be the 0. Put that up here, kind of away from your action pool. And then this one would be a 6. And as you spend your prana on either event, like say I need to get 4 for something, you just take 4 out, put it back in the bag, or you would just roll this die down, going from 6 to 2. In both cases, it's easy. You have this visual representation right in front of you that anyone on the table can see. 2 prana. Really, really easy. The last thing, and those are some of the elements of the game. If the end of the turn rolled around and I hadn't used this wicked set of stuff, or even if I had, I just blown through it, I had some dice left over, I would just put them over in a couple of marked off circles on my character sheet, which I actually showed those, I put those in the character sheets for Tributaka and Monkey. I think I looked at them in the other character sheets. But the first draft of those just have these big circles, and you were supposed to just put your focus dice in there. Again, they're off on their own. They don't interact with your action pool at all. You take a pretty decent chunk of the table to do it all, but I mean, like, it's good, clean representations of everything. And there's never any confusion about like what dice mean what, or they don't intermingle at all. So it's really not that hard to take your table space and use it like in that kind of creative way. And I think we could pretty easily do that as far as like instructing them somewhere in the body of the text. Like, hey, we could even take pictures. I mean, like, it's not like we don't live in an era where I couldn't just snap a picture of this or make like some kind of like mock-up or something in some kind of art program. So yeah, it's different than the Dungeons & Dragons. There's a lot more stuff you have to keep track of, but every element you keep track of isn't in itself too complicated, and their interaction is pretty apparent. This is your magic go-go juice, this is the amount of and power of your actions, and this is like your little pool to make that better. This is kind of your player input pool. And these elements exist in a lot of role-playing games nowadays. Dungeons & Dragons has them. This would be spells in this case, or your special, per day, abilities. This would just be a d20, and then this over here would be advantage or something like that. And in Fate, you'd see that too. You'd have dice here, and then you would have your fate points. So yeah, these elements show up. We have a visual representation for them. I don't think it's super confusing. So hopefully that kind of explains why I didn't run into that problem. Let me see. The next core thing about the system, because really there's only a few, right? There's the action pool, which is just what you roll every turn. There's focus, which we lifted that from the river. That's and their interplay is so solid from the get-go. Like Weapons of the Gods nailed it, and then Legends of the Woolen nailed it. And it's because they kept this basic mechanic of you roll this pool here and you have some extra dice you can mess with. It's brilliant. And that kind of came prepackaged for us when we decided to base a game off of those. Let's not screw them. It's so elegant and wonderful. So all of the depth of those gets kept in our game immediately. My design, and a lot of the stuff I'm going to argue for, is actually grows out of the root that Eric brought up in one of his YouTube videos, which is the design of the lake as a central die mechanic was to make characters good at everything. Kung Fu characters, you see that a lot in Wuxi, where your kung fu masters are just kind of good at whatever the hell they do. Are they bouncing on trapeze? Are they eating fire? Are they cooking? It doesn't matter. It completely doesn't matter. They're amazing at it. And so that's what the lake represented. And since we essentially lifted the lake wholesale, one of the design elements that we inherited from Legends of the Woolen was that characters that have a larger lake are just going to be better at everything. And so a lot of my design was kind of wrapping the game and the way the game plays around that. Now, the reason a lot of this stuff happened, and this is kind of going into the next video too, because this is going to be something that's going to the marketing angle of this game. So the reason that it has some of the elements it has that are more advanced than just the focus and the action pool, the reason the chakras work like they do, the reason the techniques work like they do, the reason the difficulty and effect scale works like it does, is all because the first game I was designing right before we started going to this I think Brahamanda is what Vic called it. Right before we started working on Brahamanda, I was kind of designing a Dragon Ball Z game, just kind of for the hell of it, for David, and I was kind of kicking that around in my head, and a lot of the things I realized when I was designing that made it into this. So the three big core pillaral things that have been in my head as far as like what essential experience do I need to deliver as a game designer at the table, like have been Dragon Ball Z. It's been a huge one, and of course Dragon Ball 2. I was a big fan of Dragon Ball. Naruto, which I think was probably more popular here in the States than it was internationally. I don't know how familiar you guys are with that. Naruto here was huge because it was basically like training wheels for Dragon Ball Z. It was kid ninjas, and they had all kinds of crazy, kooky powers. It was very, very popular here. So Naruto got in, and the other thing that I really wanted to model after was Avatar: The Last Airbender. Again, big kind of I want to call it disruptive here. Like, it was such an unusual cartoon, and I don't know how familiar you guys are with it, if you've seen it, if it was a big deal in your countries. But in America, at least in my part of America, it was a really big deal. It was kind of this sort of sleeper hit that got. It was such a big deal as a cartoon show. They made a live action movie out of it. So that's pretty rare to happen. It's happened for like a few franchises, like Teenage Mutant Turtles did that, Power Rangers did that, and then these guys did it. So yeah, Avatar is one of the other things. And to boil it down, it's kind of the adventures of Kid Buddha. And everyone has zany elemental themed powers, and it gives you it's got a very unique kind of flavor to it, but it's comparable to Naruto and Dragon Ball Z. So when I sat down to designing what is the core experience of those games, and a lot of the things I'm about to tell you about are based on that core experience, I was like, okay, well, what do those have in common? What does that genre of thing have in common? And really, the core of it was the physical stuff, and I think that we're sort of making a shonen game. We're making a boys action kung fu game. My wife has pointed out that girls can also play this, and that's true. The really radical gender-based marketing in Japan doesn't necessarily apply outside of Japan, but in Japan they call it shonen, which basically means boy cartoon. And that's what we're doing. We're doing Kung Fu Punch game. Now, where the previous games did that fine. Weapons of the Gods did really well. Legends of the Woolen did really well for Kung Fu Punch. As a matter of fact, I would say almost every rule in Weapons of the Gods was about Kung Fu punching. There really wasn't much for anything else. Like the secret arts tucked away in the back of the book in this confusing, impossible to penetrate section. And the thing that was a really good move, I think, for Legends of the Woolen was that they took that out and they're like, no, this is the most important thing. You can be a courtier, you can be a doctor, and it brought that weirdness and the universe of all this other stuff that wasn't punching, and they made it more central. Unfortunately, the mechanics were still primarily about punching, and there wasn't a lot of support for non-punch things. Now, I think I found an eloquent solution to that. Again, I'll get to that in a minute. But the Kung Fu Punch is the most critical thing to get right, and it's the thing that everything has in common amongst those three, those three media I mentioned. So when it comes to that, and I'm gonna go kind of off the rails of the core design a little bit here, and start kind of eking into the more recent design I've been doing that I think that we should incorporate into that core design. The three pillars. Let me back up. We have to do some kind of skill thing. It can't just be attack and defense. Anyone can do an attack and defense thing. We need to give GMs and players something they can kind of grab onto. So, like, whenever I roll a set of 3 1s, if I don't want to punch somebody with that, because I know how much damage that does. I know that'll do 31 damage if they don't block it, and if they block it with 1 die, it'll be minus that dice facing plus 10. Etc. So I know what kind of damage that does, but that doesn't really make it real. Like, that doesn't link into anything in the narrative. To bridge into the narrative, you have to make a scale of effect. So the first thing I wanted to bring up is the scale of effect thing that I sent specifically to Vic, but really it was for everyone to check out. Now you guys will remember that from the playtest, David and Vic will, because that's a big thing that happened. The higher you rolled, the more collateral damage happened. So it made bigger booms. You got to the point where you could essentially punch someone so hard it was like an atomic bomb, punching them. And I think that works really well for Model and Dragon Ball Z. But they did other non-punch things in Dragon Ball Z that showed off their strength. Frieza at one point lifts up a mountain with his mind, and Goku pushes it. So there's stuff like that they do that shows off, how fast they are, how strong they are. Let me see. Characters get shot all the time in Dragon Ball Z with automatic weapons, and they just be like, whatever. So, and that showed off how tough they are. And suddenly we had, as an audience, kind of the scale to understand the level they were operating at. So the effect scale, I rooted down to 3 very core things. They're the physical things. How strong are they? How fast and graceful are they? And then how tough and endurant are they? Like, how much stamina do they have? How much punishment can they endure? And the effect scale I sent you guys is actually based on an old RPG, the Marvel Face Rape system. Marvel is one of the very first RPGs ever really designed in a commercial sense. Ramble Z, Dungeons and Dragons preceded it, and it was actually made by those same guys, TSR. At one point, the Marvel comic book line decided to make an RPG because it was a burgeoning market, and they made this game. And what they did in it, and this was a very innovative thing at the time, was they basically made a chart which was how effective are you at doing your thing. It was a D100 system then, and as you got more powerful, you got basically automatic shifts upward on the chart. So you would roll a D100, and it would tell you how well you did something. And if you were better at it, you automatically got what is essentially a +5 or +10 or something, and it shifted you up that effect scale. And it had categories of effect, which were like poor, average, good, amazing, spectacular, and it would give you examples of what you could do with that. So like if, say, you were a weakling and you rolled really poorly, you wouldn't be able to pick up more than 30 or 40 pounds. You might say that is a poor performance of strength. But if you were like super powerful, like you were Superman, that's a DC thing, but whatever. You were Superman and you rolled fairly poorly. Well, even at his worst, Superman can probably bench press the moon. So you would automatically shift up, and it would be like a normal person rolling 99. That's you rolling a 1 as Superman. So you're bench pressing the moon. And if you rolled higher, you could do even more absurd things. But that chart and the categories they used were really good because they were modeling comic books. And in a lot of ways, we're kind of doing that too. The thing that you look at visually in these mediums, the thing that you want your character to be doing, those are the same thing. The core experience of Dragon Ball Z is going to be being so strong that you can lift up a car and throw it. Being so fast you can dodge a bullet. Being able to wade through red hot lava because you're just invincible to that kind of stuff. That's part of the core experience. And so strength is on that chart, and The higher your set, the more absurd things you can lift. Speed and grace are on that chart, so again, the higher your set, the faster you're moving, to the point where you're like kind of warping through time almost. And then, of course, the higher you roll, the more you can endure. So, like I said, that wading through hot lava, you could do that if you roll high enough. So, the reason I put it out like that was to keep that core experience there. And the reason I didn't add more to it was because I think that with the basic, most core rules, we don't need more than that. Because there could be an argument for, like, well, what about really smart characters? Or what about social characters or spiritual characters? Okay, granted. But those are things that we can design later in supplements or as add-ons and things to give as a toolkit to a GM and say, okay, if you want this kind of anime with really smart characters, you'll use this as one of the core things that's on the chart, in addition to the strength and dexterity and what have you. I don't think we need to explicitly say that you can remove things from that chart, but you could if you wanted to make it a little less zany. Like, I don't necessarily give you an example for that, but like, but I don't want to clutter that action pool, thing too much. I want it to be as clean as possible, and having a single chart that a player, like a single difficulty chart for strength, dex, and con, basically, that's either on the character sheet or some of the characters can reference easily, or some of the GM can reference, like the inside of a GM screen, I think that kind of delivers on the whole, oh, I'm Goku, oh, I'm Krillin, oh, I'm Naruto, or Gara the Sand, or whatever. Like, I'm this fast, I'm this strong, I'm this tough. So, basing a design like that, I think, is a good idea, and that sort of leads into one of my other points I wanted to make, which is, let's see, where are my little notes here? I have to consult my notes here. Structure. Okay, so another part of a core rules that is actually very important for balance reasons is the round structure. When it comes to what you do in your turn, both Weapons of the Gods and Legends of the Woolen got a little wacky. Like, they had some things that were really strict, and they had a lot of stuff that was really nebulous. And so, in play, what would happen, at my table at least, was that actions and people's turns would really bleed into each other in a not good way. Like, I kept finding myself as a GM having to be like, okay, what are you doing? What are you doing? What's happening here? Okay, well, he's doing this. Oh, wait, no. Okay, he can't do that because he did that. It was a mess. It really was. And I loved that game, but that was one of the things that whenever we got to doing Legends, the Woolen Light thing, I was like, I've got to change that. I've got to add enough structure that people can play it. And I'm going to go back to Magic the Gathering on this one. Magic the Gathering, you have a very clean turn structure. It's very clear what you can do and when you can do it. You always, untap all of your stuff first. You always draw a card next, and then you have your main phase. And that's very similar to the way I design the turn structure here. You start off, everybody declares whether they're doing their dramatic or their mechanical penalties for their chi imbalances, which I found myself in the most recent playtest I did. I would just ask everybody, okay, guys, which dramatics are you taking? Which mechanicals are you taking for your imbalances? That's the first thing you do, because that can affect how many dice you roll. Then you roll your dice, and then you just kind of line them up like I did, and then you bid for initiative, and that has been a huge hit in every time. Like, as soon as I introduced that rule of initiative bidding, people went crazy for it. One of my playtesters liked it so much, he suggested an optional rule, which has actually kind of snuck its way into the main rules, which is the rebid, where you can up your ante if you want to, and then final bid stand. And I like that too, because I think that bidding is something that's kind of unique to our game. You can't really bid for initiative in Dungeons & Dragons. The only initiative that just makes a roster. That's utilitarian, but kind of dull. With this, there's a strategy to it, and it's not such an overwhelming strategy that it becomes swamped. Like, I very specifically disassociated it from other things. I want it to be very cleanly a who wants to go first thing. Because again, going back to Legends of the Woolen, at the beginning of your turn, you had to choose everything you wanted to do for the turn. Do I want to go to another zone? Do I want to make a wave? Do I want to recover chi? Everything. Everything was off that initiative roll. And that, I mean, the reason I try to push that towards its own thing is to say this isn't just initiative, this is a strategy roll. This is a whole phase of the combat, and as I was because of how confusing and how much that front loaded the strategy on the player. It was very not user friendly. Now I think that if we had eventually gotten used to the system, it would have been a little cleaner. I still think it's a lot to ask of a new player. With this though, it's a lot easier. Okay, if you want to go first, like the base initiative is you're just going to roll a d10, whoever rolls highest wins. But if you want to bid, you can take any of your dice in front of you and say, that's my bid. I have a 7. You know, and then someone else can be like, well, I'm going to set of 2 3s. That's a 23. Well, how are you going to act now? And then you know, and then the GM asks them to want to rebid because you can up it now. A new player will be immediately engaged in that, and there's also enough strategy to keep a older player interested. Like, there's never been a turn in any of the playtests I've done where no one bid. There's never been one where it was cumbersome because it's so quick and light. So the initiative bid is super important, and the focus of it, how uncluttered it is a very important part of the design. The action pool and the fact that you only roll once is part of the design of the game. One of the complaints about again, Legends of the Woolen was that you just kept rolling and rolling and rolling, and you kept some of the dice and you didn't keep others, and so it was a mess. With this, you've got everything you can do in your turn right in front of you, and the part of the design of that is that as you go through your turn, as you go through the initiative bit, as you go through doing your turn attacking and such like, as you go through weathering your opponent's attack with your same die pool, it naturally limits how many actions you can take, and it makes you think of the strategy as you're coming to that part of the turn. This is part of the design. So I want to go faster than him because he's got better dice than me, so I will overbid him in initiative. Awesome. Now it's my turn first, and now, even though he's rolled better than me, I can use all of my dice for offense, and he has to ask himself, alright, am I going to use my big sets to ablate his attack, or am I going to take the damage, see if I can shrug it off, and then use my big die sets to wail on him? That's a strategic way of looking at it, and that's a very obvious strategy, and it's got enough depth that as you do it round to round and you get different things, that you are consistently engaged as a player. It's simple enough and it's visually communicated enough that it's very engaging. So that's part of the action pool design and why you have action dice instead of continuing to roll your lake. You do it one time to minimize rolling at the table, and then it's all about resource allocation after that. And resource allocation is a very, very important part of the strategy of almost any strategy game, which I want that to lead into the chakras, because we've had some talk about those too. So that's the round. And the one last thing on that, the focus being drug in at the end of the round is another part of the structure, because you're not going to know in advance at the start of your turn if you're going to be moving dice over there. You're going to want to keep your options open with the dice throughout the turn. At the end of the turn, retaining them from turn to turn allows you to take the random thing you rolled and then make it a part of your strategy. Again, that's all by design. So the turn structure itself is actually very important. So the turn-to-turn playing of the game and the opening of chakras is actually another very important part of this. This also, I feel, needs to be in the core rules. I'm going to tell you why. Now, and this specifically is addressing why I made the chakras like I did, and it is a large part of refutation of David's request, which was to make it more dramatic to open chakras, make it more damaging or dangerous and risky. Okay, so chakras. They are... Let me just check here. Alright. So, going back to Magic the Gathering, with the chakras, Chakras are the same thing as land in Magic the Gathering. In Magic the Gathering, your resource is land. It's a card you put down, doesn't cost you anything, and you turn outside, you tap it, and it gives you mana. Mana is your magic go-go juice. It lets you cast spells. The more mana a spell costs, the more powerful the spell is. Because you only have a certain amount of cards in your deck, in a competitive deck, and because it is better to have not land in your hand, it's an interesting resource, because every time you draw a card, it should be giving you an advantage in the game. Kind of the same thing with using techniques in our game. Every time you use a technique, it should be giving you an advantage in the game. Every time you use your chi, that should give you a significant advantage in the game. There's a reason you spent your chi on it. So there's a very strong analog there. However, with the land, every time you draw one that's in your hand, you can lay it down. You may do one per turn. That is a natural pacing mechanism to the game, which starts out with a very small mana cost and then gets larger as the game goes on. So, at one point in the design of Magic, and I don't know if this might have been from the inception, but at one point the players themselves figured out what's called a mana curve. In other words, how to make use of the mana that's on the table. So a veteran player of Magic the Gathering will be playing one land every turn, so they always are at the mana curve, the max amount they can possibly put down, and they will use every mana that they put down every turn, 100% efficiently use it. Nothing is sat there untapped. They're consistently using it, and they're getting it all back. Now, it's a lot more forgiving than our system, but you can sort of see how everyone uses that same system very, very easily. You know, more mana equals more power. That's very simple. You put the mana down, you tap it, you get the power. It's all very, very easy to learn. I taught people this within moments, you know. Oh, this is a land. You do this, and then it gives you power, and it's color, blah, blah. Super easy, you know. Chakras are the same way. They are a resource. And you start with a certain amount open, which have a certain amount of recovery and a certain pool. I like having the whole pool at the very beginning. I think that way you can kind of do bombastic stuff early, because that, again, that's kind of delivering on the essential experience of Dragon Ball Z and stuff like that, is they don't pull their punches. Like, a lot of times you see big opening salvos, and I wanted to have that in this game. But I also wanted it to be something strategic, something that would engage players in not only at the table, but also if they are the kind of players who actually buy books, that would engage them in the metagame, which would encourage book buying and also just encourage people to think about this game and talk about it and kind of be our salespeople for us. Word of mouth is the most powerful force in selling role-playing games. Period. Nothing beats it. Nothing beats a good review. Nothing beats a fun game. And absolutely nothing beats someone bragging about the game to their friends. Because if your friend comes to you and you've played Dungeons & Dragons with them, and they're like, dude, found this new game, it's all kung fu, and it's really cool, there's all this nifty strategy and moving parts, and it's like, if they say, it's like Magic, we win. Because everyone plays Magic. If you play Dungeons & Dragons, you probably started with Magic. So being like Magic is good. If we get that comparison, I've nailed it. Anyway, back to the chakras again. They start out open, and you can open more. It takes something, though. Much like in Magic, where you have to draw and then play it from your hand, reducing your card advantage, in this you have to use sets to open a chakra. So, it takes away from your ability to attack, to defend, to do skills, anything. And what that gives you is, it's not a lot initially. It doesn't give you a full open chakra, it gives you part of one that you get next turn. So it is a long-term strategy. What part of the thing that makes that a good pacing mechanism is that you will naturally be using your chi round to round to stay alive, especially if you're fighting a boss or someone more powerful than you, if you're outnumbered or something like that. And I think that's the more interesting combats are the ones like that. You're going to be using a lot of your chi, probably defensively, and you're going to be launching attacks where you have an opportunity to do some real significant damage. To make it so the game has a escalating combat, it becomes more intense and powerful and dangerous towards the later rounds, we need to give players and bad guys the ability to build up resources. The only way to do that is going to be to allow them to open chakras. And I think what we're going to wind up seeing is veteran players who get really good at putting a part of their action pool and a part of their focus pool aside just to make sure they can open as many, like a minimum of a certain number of chakras, like one chakra a turn or something, one every 2 turns. That's another reason. One of the reasons you guys kind of sold me on having a higher action pool with basic characters. I always wanted to have it at 4. I think 5 probably is a better place to put it. Just for that very reason. It's more likely to get multiple sets with the way the dice math works. And what I want people to be thinking about is, okay, I've got 2 sets on my first roll. Like in this case, I got like this really nasty set of 3. But what if I gotten 2 different sets, which was the more likely thing to have rolled? If I'd gotten 2 sets on my first roll, or if I'd saved some in my focus pool and gotten a set 2-3 sets on my second roll, I want a really big consideration to be, well, shouldn't I open a chakra? Because that's going to allow me to unleash my more powerful attacks in later rounds. And that's a great way to do it. There's actually a really good argument for keeping the chakras low initially, too. Like keeping the prana pools low. Just so that we have a much more pronounced escalation from earlier rounds to later rounds. I like the way it works right now, because that escalation happens because of player agency. It's not like Vic, I was in a lot of ways inspired by the way you were talking about 13th Age. In 13th Age, they have a similar mechanic where things naturally escalate as the combat goes on. In this case, the only way to escalate things, the only way to get those more chakras open and what have you, is by doing it in character, in player. You make the decision, and it naturally escalates you towards the later rounds. And as players get more experience, they're going to see bad guys doing that. They're going to realize that they're falling behind on what is quite literally, or it's not literally, but is essentially an arms race of magic. So that's my argument. Like, that's the design intent of chakras. They're called chakras because that's a cool word, and that links directly to the kind of mystical thing that we're going for with the. That's part of the flavor of the game. But this could be called anything. It could be called magic pools. It could be called whatever. It doesn't matter what it's called. And it matters that it functions like that, though. So if we do Dave's suggestion, and we make it so that every time you open a chakra, it's this big dramatic event that's like injuring you, or if it's risking destroying your body, there's another element layered into that, and that element is I don't want to say it's toxic, because that's a little harsh, but it's essentially wrecking that design element, because the design element is to allow it to escalate as it goes later on, and that escalation is up at player agency. If we make it so that that's always risky to do, then we're not going to see it happen as often. We're going to disincentivize it. So I don't think the core chakra opening mechanic should have an element of risk to it. I think we should leave it alone because it's simpler and it makes a good game. So that's my argument for it. Now, do I think that there should be no design depth for like a kind of a Kaioken technique like Goku had, where he blows open a bunch of chakras and it's super risky? Absolutely. I mean, like, because in Magic the Gathering, there are things that get you more mana, and some of them cost your life, some of them make you discard cards, some of them make you sacrifice, whatever. They have a payment or a risk for getting you more resources. That's fertile ground for design. But we can, not in the core system, that's something we can design add later. We can have a technique which is, I blow open my chakras and I have to roll a certain focus, or something like that. So yeah, Dave, not a bad idea, but not in the core system. Let's keep the chakras clean and as they are, because they have a function, they have a purpose, and if we screw with it, we're risking doing what Legends of the Wulin did, which is every piece of that system was in this big interconnected mesh, and you couldn't easily remove pieces. You couldn't easily modify pieces because the whole mesh would just get warped, and that's why people were reluctant to try to fix clear problems with the game. Like one of the biggest ones was immediately noticed when it was released. was how powerful elemental chi was. Like fire chi, water chi, all that. Way better. Way better than any other kind of chi. It's better than the corrupt chi. It was better than the divine chi. It was better than anything. It was way better than the normal chi. And the costing metric was wrong for it. And it was stupid to not play an elemental character. The balance support in the system were really unclear, and there was no way to take it out. You couldn't just extricate it. It was so woven into lore sheets, and it was so woven into techniques, and into energy attacks and all that. There was so much that was connected to it that removing it just basically tore the game to shreds. We don't want to do that. We want the core system to be something that is solid as a rock, easy to learn, with an experience that delivers, something really solid, and something a little vanilla maybe. The reason we want to keep it vanilla is because ultimately what we're doing as far as a business model is going to be making supplements for it that give you options for that core system. If we have a solid enough core system, we never have to do a second edition. We never have to do errata. We never have to do a lot of the stuff you see plaguing game design nowadays. Exalted went through 2.5 editions, and they still screwed it up. I mean, like, that's just woeful. We won't have that. We're not going to have that, because we are basing the design of this on a solid model that hums along nicely. It's so simple, and it's so eloquent, and we don't have to worry about anything like that. So that trap, that tangle that Legends did, we can avoid it by designing it like this. So that is my argument for that. That's my whole thing on it. Feel free to talk about it, but like as far as designing it, it's clear that this is the better way to do it. So that's that. Oh, where am I going next? I did chakras. Okay, we did the round structure. Talked about that. Okay, so another thing I ran past, another minor rules change, is actions versus bonus actions. Okay, so this one's really simple. You get 3 actions in your turn you can use with a single die. So if you happen to roll pretty decently, like this, and you just arrange them all. Wow, what is with me rolling sets tonight? That's really good. Okay, you arrange them, and you got like this. You got a 1, 2, set of 7s, 8, and a 0. Also, again, see how easy that was. If I was like, okay, I'm going to need that set of 7s to open up my chakra, you use that, boom, you get 7 chi and a newly opened chakra with recovery of 2. Very easy. You still have 4 dice here, and in Legends, you would just be kind of sitting here, like, I can't really do anything with this. You could launch 1 attack by the rules of the book, 1 normal attack. So that was pretty weak. In our system, however, what I want to do is you get 3 actions you can do with just a single die. So you can move from one zone to another zone. I think we should keep zones or their equivalent. It takes 1 die to do it. Bam. That's done. Again, you can see your resources dwindling, but you get something out of it. I moved to a different place, so I have range on this guy. So like a bow, I can use my bow. If I'm running away from him, I've just gotten 1 zone away. Whatever, so there's something for that. You can use an attack with a single die, 1 time. So, okay, I'm going to use my this will actually be a 0. I'm going to use my 8 to attack. Pretty impressive 18. I'm just going to slap them, That'll take away some of their defense dice. I can modify that with techniques, whatever. And then you also get a skill. And the skill is one of those 3 things I mentioned earlier. Doing something fast, doing something strong, or doing something tough. Okay, if you're in blistering cold, the GM might say, okay, the blistering cold is enough to deal 10 damage to you every round, and you have to do a endurance skill check to resist it. So I've got a 2 here. If I use that as my endurance skill, I get a 12. Alright, I'm not taking that damage now. It's essentially a defense against the icy cold blizzard. Or, if it's like, okay, well, if you want to go from the zone you're in to the top of this building, you got to jump across this, this web work of cables. So you need, a 10, for dexterity. Oh, well, there we go. I got a 12. And I'll just use that as my skill for the round. Bam. So that's the actions you get. Again, move, not attack, attack, those three things, move, attack, skill, anything that way, that's a D&D thing. That's every game. So many games have used that. It's such a classic design element. And it's just, we're going to have nice chunky action pools, 5 or so dice, each is a minimum. They're going to be able to, do a lot of stuff with them. They're going to be rolling singles like this. So allowing them to do multiple stuff with single dice is going to give them the ability to be cool every round, even with those nice foxy sets. Speaking of sets, if you happen to roll them, you can do a bonus action. So let's get our 7s back. Say I want to kick the hell out of this guy. I want to hit him, and I want to hit him again. If I use my 8 to do an 18 to attack him, that's my 1 attack, right? But if I have a set of 2 or more dice, I can do the same action again, the same kind of action. So I can do another attack. So I've got 1 for 18 and 1 for 27. That's like punch, kick. Imagine like flying out Kung Fu style. You could instead use your 27 with your skill. Like, okay, well, I want to endure the blistering cold, and I want to do an acrobatic backflip over this tank. Well, there you go. 2 skills. You get a bonus action because you have a set of 2 dice. So that allows you to do a flurry of actions. As I said before, the thing that the dice do is they give you multiple smaller sets long before they give you single powerful sets. So, sorry, I'm doing this at like 3 o'clock in the morning because my eyes hurt. So, harnessing what we know the dice are going to do to deliver on that essential experience is a really good way of giving the players something from the dice that will naturally translate into what we want to see. So that's the way the action economy works in my newest revision of the rules. Is you can use a single die to do a move between zones, a skill, or an attack. And if you have a set of 2 or more dice, you may do bonus actions, which are multiples of those things. So that's what that is. And of course, whenever you use techniques, whatever they generate can give you the same thing. So if I have a technique that generates a single die, then I can use that for my attack if it's better than a normal attack. Or I can combine that with another die and make that attack more powerful. Or like, say I got the 2 7s and I got the 8, and I've got a technique that generates a 2. Alright, so I can use the 8 for an 18 attack, the 2 7s for a 27. I could use that technique to combine with this 2 for a 22 as well. Now I've got 3 attacks. All I have to do is roll a set and pay for a technique. Again, it's a nice, simple way of just delivering on the thing that we're trying to deliver on. And because both attacker and defender are going to have techniques and are going to have die pools and what have you, there's a natural kind of balance to it. There's this nice ragged edge because you never know what the dice are going to do. So I feel like that's a really solid way of making the characters feel like they can do stuff. Another complaint that was leveled against Legends of the Rule-In was that there were a lot of times you would roll your dice and they just wouldn't give you anything. This very eloquently solves that problem by saying you can do 3 things every round at a bare minimum. And you can do even more if you happen to roll well or if you have a wise expenditure of your prana. Awesome! That grants a lot of player agency and allows them to never have a turn that goes by that's completely dull. So, all good stuff there. So I wanted to make sure I was making that clear and give you the reason I did it. Alright, what do we got here? That was 0.4, 0.5. Okay. I think we already covered the reason I did the strength and stamina, so I can skip past that. Okay, techniques and the cost metric. I just want to kind of touch on this. I gave you guys a cost metric. Seems like you guys absorbed it pretty well. Because we know the dice are not going to give you big sets of 3 or 4 or more very often, making the techniques a place you can go to get that is a good way of saying more powerful characters use techniques to get these higher levels, therefore they must have more prana, therefore they have more open chakra starting out. So the real thing that kind of jumps you up the curve isn't your action pool like you would expect, it is actually your magic. This is reflected in Dragon Ball Z. This is kind of an Eastern thing when it comes to Wuxi. The more internal mastery you have, the more dangerous and powerful you are. That's why those more powerful techniques that give you bigger and bigger sets instead of just more facings, bigger sets have such a value placed on them. Now, I have not sat down and worked out the math one for one on it, and I think with your background in algebra, I might want to put my head together with you with this one, because we really do want to mathematically encourage the opening of chakra, like I've mentioned it before. So it would be really useful to be able to, cause it's been a while since I designed these rules, to get together and talk with you about this, about like, when do we want to see certain powers come into play, how many chakras should be open, how high should the recovery pool be, that kind of stuff, and what do we want that to produce. Because I've got a really good difficulty scale for effect, and we've already got the tools to do it. If we really want to nail this and make it perfect on the initial open, we really do want to make sure the math behind chakras and the constant techniques is really dead on. I've kind of guessed at it, and clearly that's held up in playtest. I'd be more comfortable if we had a more solid mathematical footing that I could provide. So, yeah, that's a place where I could definitely use some help. I don't know that it's absolutely critically necessary, but I think that we could make a really solid product doing it that way. Okay, moving on. Let's see here. It's techniques, power levels, and that. Okay, so damage and wounds. I wanted to go back to that because I've designed this and redesigned it. Here's what I'm thinking now. This is a slight tweak and another very small rules adjustment, because the way I had it before was too complicated. It didn't really play at my table. It didn't play at David's table. It was just too complicated. It was too many moving parts. And I was going back to designing it like Legends would have done it, where you continue to roll your ripples, and it was just all over. It was a mess. So what I did with the redesign most recently was I just made it so you just had health levels, and that was it. Each health level had 10 hit points. When you took damage, you just took the hit points off of the level. When you lost a level, you went down to the next level, and then your last few health levels gave you negatives. You had negative to your focus or your action pool or closed chakras or whatever. There's a couple of ways we can do it. I think that's a good way of showing when things are getting serious. I think what we need to look into with it, and I'm not completely developed this, but like what I think we need to look into with it is scaling your action pool with your health. I sort of was doing that with the way I put everything together, and I think if we do it that way, we can have a thing like, okay, so we have NPCs that have action pool 1. They're complete mooks. They suck. And so you could say, from the health perspective, that if you lose your last health level, you lose consciousness. Okay, that's no doubt. I don't have to it's not even like a rule almost. It's such a thing. You lose your last hit point, you drop. You lose your last health level, you drop. Okay, so that guy only has 1 health level. So we have guys with action pool 2. They're like, say elite guard kind of thing. They're not player characters. They're not badasses. They're not sub-lieutenants. They're just, they're those guys that have the special outfits, and they're just a little cooler than the average, lame NPC. So if they had 2 health levels, you could say, okay, on your last one, you lose consciousness. On your second to last one, you take some kind of negative, like you close all your chakra. You can't use magic anymore. That doesn't necessarily affect those guys, but if they were the kind of dudes that actually had magic, it really would. It would show you that they're getting beaten up, and it would be a really severe penalty because they don't have the ability to shrug off wounds. So if we look at it like that, where it's like, okay, so NPC levels are basically action pool 1 to 4. We could say action pool 1 to 4 is where the penalties show up, and we could have that modify and have all of our wound penalties there. And that way, when we get to player characters, if they're action pools of 5 and their health tracks of 5, that first level they lose could have no effect. It could just be like, okay, you got beaten up a little, but you could take it because you're super tough. And then as they lost more health levels, they would be getting those same kind of negatives. So that's one way of looking at it. The other thing I think we probably should go back to a little bit is, there seem to be some mobs that found their way to my house. The other thing I think we should go back to is losing health levels equals getting an imbalance. The way I had it done, where you were rolling to make imbalances, is a little bit sketchy. But you could say, like, okay, if you lose one of your last 3 health levels, you get an imbalance. That's not bad. If you lose one of your last 4 health levels, you get an imbalance. You know, it's worse as it goes further on. That's not bad, actually. That's not bad at all. Speaking of those, let me see. But yeah, so that's not completely done yet. We need to sort of think about what we want wounds to be doing, what we want the death spiral of losing health to be. I think good pay dirt for it, like a good place it needs to be, is there needs to be a good chunk of health levels where you don't take any negatives. You just start taking damage and you're getting closer to those negatives. The reason I think that is from coming from an Exalted background. I played a lot of Exalted. As soon as you lost your first health level in Exalted, you started taking penalties immediately. And it made you feel not epic. It made you feel like you got your ass kicked really quickly, and it was just a lot less fun. And I always made characters that had giant piles of health levels so they could take a significant ass kicking. And being able to take punch after punch after punch after energy blast is part of the essential experience. So there needs to be a fairly good chunk of health levels that they have no effect. And then there's the last 3 or so should have an effect, because again, essential experience, whenever you get really fucked up in a combat, not only does it hurt you in that combat, you're contributing to your kind of general death spiral and how serious things are, which will represent mechanically with negatives or imbalances, but it also carries over into future combats. One of the things that was good and got a lot of praise with Legends of the Wulin, and should have gotten it with Weapons of the Gods technically too, but Legends especially did this, where you would get conditions from your wounds. And so in later combats, this would show up. And you would have that the whole time. Like, it would just stick around on you, and you had to deal with it. That's brilliant. We should do everything we can to retain that, because it was an absolute piece of brilliant design. It wasn't carried off super well, again, because the misunderstanding of the math of Legends of the Wulin didn't allow it to work. But we are smart with math, and we now have the experience of that game, under our belts, so we know how to make it good. So I really feel like imbalances need to be something that stick around and happen in combat. So, to sum it up, happy place, health levels, imbalances as the negative, and then have imbalances stick around. So, moving on. I don't want to dwell on that one, because it's just kind of one of the chunks here. Imbalances, again, I kind of mentioned this before. Making the choice, a player choice, between mechanical and dramatic was a good idea in Legends of the Wulin. Making it a round-long choice and making that switch flip at the beginning of the combat is another really good design choice that makes this a much more approachable game. At the very beginning of the combat, the very beginning of every round, before you roll your dice, the GM just says, okay, before you roll, look at your imbalances, and you tell me if you want to do the dramatic or if you want to do the mechanical. And I think we're going to get a lot of people doing the dramatic. And at my table, what would happen is I'd have a lot of people taking dramatic and that not actually really manifesting in their descriptions at all. They'd find a way to kind of describe around it, and there was not enough traction in the rules to enforce it as a GM. So what I've done with it, and this is very subtle game design but very important, is I've allowed the GM to have veto power over actions. You switch it over to a dramatic penalty, say your arm is broken. I can't use my arm. You're like, yeah, that's not that big a penalty. I'm Kung Fu. I'll fight him with my feet, my other arm. I got plenty of limbs left. So I'll take dramatic. Dude, I'll just wield the sword in my other hand. No big deal. Okay, so later on in the combat, GM knows that. You've got a card in front of you that's getting flipped over. I use note cards for this. I think we should have our own little printout cards. But again, this is something you just put right there, flip it, everyone can see it visually, everyone knows what's going on, and it reminds you of your penalties, and it reminds everyone else what is going on with you wound-wise. So that you get into this point later on in that combat, you're like, oh, I've got one arm. You're like, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to grab that guy. I'm just going to grab him and I'm going to hold on to him so he can't attack while my buddy beats him up. Something you'd see in a Kung Fu thing. The GM can look at your dramatic penalties, just kind of look over and be like, well, you only got one arm, dude. You can't really grab him, so I'm going to veto that action. By putting that in the rules and saying the GM has veto power because they are a referee, and that is their job to make certain that the rules are being followed and that the structure of the narrative is being followed. By very explicitly putting that in the rules, what I've done is I've empowered GMs to give teeth to the dramatic part of those penalties. So that was a very important part of the design. It's very small and subtle. I want to make sure I was mentioning to you guys because it's not super obvious. There's a lot of little things I've put into the way I've written the rules and how I've structured them that they're there for a very specific reason. And it's based on my at-the-table experiences and how I know games run. A lot of time, like, it used to be the only way you do a GM is it would be a referee. The GM was an impartial third party, and that's what they did. They would make on-the-spot rulings, and so rulings were more important than what was written in the book. At some point during the lifetime of role-playing games, and this isn't necessarily a good or bad thing, but at some point during the lifetime, the role of the GM became more nebulous. Some games didn't even have GMs anymore. And so it's important for a game to establish the role of the GM within the body of the rules. Like, what does the GM do? What are they for? I don't think we really need a what is role-playing section in every single thing that we make, but within the context of how rules are enforced, we need to very clearly line out the GM's duties. Because the GM reads the rules, that's part of their job. And when they read those rules, they've got to be like, okay, this is a place where I have control. This is a place where I can enforce balance. This is a place where I can do this and that. It's very important. So I wanted to mention that because, again, not super obvious, but it's a better way of doing an already good idea. It's a cleaner way of doing it that plays better at the table. Okay, going on. We've been doing this for an hour. I'm going to try to wrap this up really quick. Alright, let's see. That was I want to say 0.8 on that one. Okay, so 9. Okay, here's a new bit of game design. I've been kind of hinting at this, but I want to codify it. When I was talking earlier about the actions you do with your die pool, you got the strength, the dex, and the stamina. How fast am I, how strong am I, etc. Okay, you may have noticed there was something for your brain. Nothing social, there's nothing spiritual in it at all. So you might be asking yourselves, like, what about, like, a spiritual character? What about a well-trained, intelligent character? You know, what about a charismatic character? Where do they fit in? And I alluded to, well, those are things you can add on later as a GM, and you can. But another more specific way of doing skills, even more specific than just I'm a charismatic guy, is can I pilot a starship? That's a good skill that we're going to need in this game, because we have starships. So my solution to the action pool being, or my solution to the lake being you can do anything forever if you roll well enough, is the unrolled actions. Things like walking, breathing, etc. Unrolled actions are a thing you don't even need to roll dice for. You are assumed to be able to do them at a basic level of competence. And they additionally give you stuff you can do on the difficulty scale. So if you actually do dedicate dice and sets to them, you are even better at them. So walking from one place to another place, that's an unrolled action. You have to use dice for that. Running over there within a few moments, that requires dice. So that is an unrolled use of dexterity versus a rolled use of dexterity. When it comes to something more specific, like piloting a starship, I say they need to buy a skill from the lore sheet. There's no skill list in this game. There are lore sheets. And the lore sheets are cored around a skill. So, for instance, with the starship piloting thing, what that does is when you buy the lore sheet, when you buy Starship Pilot the lore sheet, it gives you the skill. It gives you an unrolled action, a narrative permission to pilot a starship. Without rolling dice or anything, you, unlike your chump friends who didn't invest in the sheet, can totally pilot a starship. And the background of how you got the training and the organizations that allow that training are all part of that lore sheet, much like they were in Legends of the Wulin. That was a good idea. That allowed people to bring forward and mechanize parts of the setting and grab parts of the setting to make them a part of their character. It was done in this mechanical way. It was really well done. The reason I want to core it onto a skill is whenever people are making characters, they're going to be thinking like, well, what do I want to do? Do I want to be a starship pilot? Do I want to be a cook? Do I want to be a ninja? And when they're flipping through our skill list, what I want them to see are the lore sheets. I want it to be like, okay, first thing, big bold top of the page. Ninjutsu. Oh, cool. That's for ninjas. I want that. That cost me 2 points. These all these skills are the same. They cost 2 points or 1 point. Super cheap. And right after that, it's like ninjutsu. Here's what it does. It's the art of doing this. It allows you to do these things, and it gives you access to this whole lore sheet. And you may now purchase anything on the lore sheet with the rest of your XP if you so choose. That way, players are immediately incentivized to grab parts of that lore and just kind of naturally open up options and advancement paths to their characters by making a character and choosing skills for it. If you give them XP and you say, okay, you can spend this on whatever you want. You can spend this on techniques, you can spend this on this and that, same thing. And we can also have Kung Fu that is based around those skills. So like for ninjutsu, rather than just being able to sneak around and do stealthy stuff, you could have a Kung Fu that you could only buy if you have a ninjutsu skill. So you have to be a ninja before you can use the ninja martial art. That's another good way of saying, okay, well, I want to have this I want to be able to have these different kinds of Kung Fu powers. Alright, well, go to the governing skill, you get that first, and then you may then invest in the powers. That also kind of gives us, as plot weavers and what have you, places to hook into things. I think that to get a skill sheet at all, it should be you pay your XP, and then you choose from a list of options about how you learned it. Were you part of this organization? Did you learn it illicitly? And how would you have done that? Stuff like that. Because then you're automatically filling in the backstory of your character too. And you're giving an explanation as a character for why you're working this way. This is a great bit of game design that allows you to make, just coming to this with no knowledge of the setting, you learn the setting through making your character. The GM is like, okay, if you're going to make a character, tell me about your concept. It's like, well, I was watching Dragon Ball Z, I thought Trunks' cool sword was awesome, I want to be a guy with a cool sword, if I come from the future, that would be fine. And you know what, we're already doing an outer space game. I don't really think that time travel is totally off the table. You'd be like, okay, cool. As a GM, you're probably going to want sword play, so this is where you go for that. And what that gives you is all this stuff, and it's going to tell you a little bit about where sword play comes from in this world, some of the crazy stuff you can do, and also gives you some kung fu about it as well. And the player might be like, well, it's like I just use my sword just to swing it. Like, do I have to have kung fu? Yeah, you can just swing your sword. That's what this gives you. But in addition to that, you got all these cool options to explore. So a player can kind of flip through that and get a good feel for everything in the setting and build their character. It also allows us to make XP something that is spent on lore sheets and lore sheets alone. If you want Kung Fu, go buy a lore sheet, or invest in a lore sheet you already have. If you want a secret art, go to a lore sheet that has it. It gives you a skill, We can embed the secret arts as Kung Fu styles, or even as just special things you can do with chi, they have to be styles, in the skill that it uses. So like the courtier's art could be courtier skill. So that is what I've been terming skill-based lore sheets. I do think we should reterm lore sheet. I feel like that is a little too on the nose. But the data sheet, scroll, you can call them a scroll. Think of a different name for them. So let's brainstorm on that a little bit. But yeah, another little bit of game design that is a way to make our game hook players and make them interested about it. So that is something I really want to share with you guys. I wanted to be really clear with how that worked. Another thing that Vic came to that I thought of whenever I was designing this, but Vic, you immediately, being a game designer, you jumped into this immediately. You're like, oh, you can do this. And I was like, you and me, Vic, we're on the same wavelength. But a thing that you did was you were like, well, how about we have some things that give them a bonus to certain skills? Brilliant. And I actually had thought about that. With the basic permission thing, you can just do it. And if you roll higher, it's better. If you upgrade the basic skill of the lore sheet, it gives you a plus 10 for free. So in other words, you can take your single die, which you get from your one skill turn, and you upgrade it by 10. Because you're not just a starship pilot, you're the best starship pilot. So your 18 is now a 28. It's the same thing. It's the same skill die, the same amount of resources from you, but because you built your character to be really good at that, you get another big bonus. So another little kind of brilliant piece of lore design. And I feel like if it's something that could, like, since it's going to be like a 1 to 10 scale or so, if we push it even further and we can say, okay, well, beyond this, there's a secret magical technique you can use that makes you better at starship piloting. We could have something costs of like techniques or costs that gives you even bigger die sets. So, all cool stuff. I got a lot of points to cover. Okay. So, skill-based lore sheets. The last thing I wanted to get into tonight was the way XP is accumulated in our system. Now, in my playtest, I was doing a version of milestones where you would do certain things that would give you XP. You basically just hit this trigger in your role playing, and it got you some XP, and that worked pretty good. That worked really well in Marvel Heroic, which is where I stole it from, and I really liked it. But I found that it was really hard to make milestone triggers that would come up and roll naturally into how someone uniquely made their character. So the way I'm approaching it now is through the dharmas. The way I wanted to do it is have when you get a dharma, what that is a goal for you, and you have one for each of your core stats. You have one for opening new chakra, you have one for your action pool, and you have one for your focus. You always have 3. Each one is a distinct goal, and it's basically a little destiny. I think when we pre-gen characters for our little mods, they should be very specific to allow the adventure to go and to naturally be led in the proper shape without railroading, but by incentivizing players to go towards it. You must protect Tripitaka from himself in this den of iniquity for the Monkey King. Okay, if you fail to do that, you don't get your Dharma. If you succeed in doing that, you succeed in your Dharma. And it's as simple as that. Once you accomplish the goal, you get its thing. They should be big payouts. When you succeed in a Dharma, you get another BIP. You get another focus slot. You get another die in your action pool. You get another open chakra. Big stuff, I feel like part of the pacing of the long game of whenever we go from doing one-shots and intro adventures into actual campaigns is going to be, we're going to want to make sure the dharmas are things that are big and sophisticated enough to actually show character growth. Now, in addition to the big goal on them, they need to have a list of, here are some things that are ways to deviate from this. And when you deviate from it, when you're bucking against your destiny, when you're fighting against your goals, when you're being headstrong, life is harder for you. Because you're not actually progressing as a person in the natural way, you're kind of forging your own destiny against the will of your betters and your better judgment. You're finding this other way of doing it. So you'll have a list of triggers, like I did in my run of this, where if you do these specific things, you get XP. And you just get them like 1 or 2 at a time. And so you can have maybe one a scene or a certain amount per session or something like that. A lot of games have actually been doing that lately, and I think it's a good design because that way you can screw up in going towards your Dharma and still get XP. And you can spend your XP on more sheets because you are learning about stuff while you do that. So that's basically how that works. You've got Dharma, and then you have different ways to gain XP. I liked XP being called Karma. I think that's a nifty idea. So you can have your Dharma, which is your destiny, and your Karma, which is kind of like the accumulated experience and baggage that you get. And you get to spend that on your own stuff. Also, there should be a Karma cost to the thing your Dharma is going to give you naturally. So say, and I'm just throwing out numbers here, say it costs 10 Karma to get another focus slot. And so you're on this Dharma to learn from this particular master about how to get your focus higher. And you keep pissing him off and failing at your missions, and every time you do that, you get another Karma. So you never succeed. You never get taught by the guy, but you accumulate 10 Karma anyway through just trying to do it and fucking it up over and over, or fighting against it over and over. So you naturally get 10 Karma, and you decide to spend it on focus. You succeeded. That's a nice way of saying what you do as a player matters, and what the GM and the rest of the group want for the game matters. The GM and the rest of the group will reward you by making your Dharma something that contributes to everyone's good time and the overall kind of shape of the story as it's getting told. And the karma will be, well, you are doing your own thing, but we're also having a good time as people at the table. And you're still making an entertaining character. So, in addition to that, I think that players should have a little pool, just a little pool next to them somewhere, of XP they can bribe people with. And I don't want to mechanize this too much. Basically what I want it to be is like, you write down a character trait, like a big flaw that your character has, or some catchphrase or something. And at any point in the game, another player can be like, hey, you know what, you're really headstrong, I think you should challenge that swordsman, and if you do, I'll bribe you with this XP, and you'll get that if you challenge him. So you basically bribe the other player to roleplay in a particular way, in accordance with how they made the character. So if you're playing a little bit too straight as a character, more people could bribe you and make it more and more actually mechanically rewarding to roleplay. Another good bridge between the dramatic and the mechanical. I say we can continue to let people bid until the guy's just like, nah, I'm gonna refuse. I refuse. Nah. Because I mean, if you get one of those XP per person at the table, my sessions are usually 3 to 4 people. The GM wouldn't have any; he wouldn't count. So it'd be 3 or 4 of those you'd have total. Every time you up your bid by 1, you're saying, I don't want to bribe anyone else. I really want to bribe you on this though. And taking those XP, that's, I mean, if we keep the XP cost low enough, that's pretty, that's tempting. So I want to do that too. Anyway, that was my 10 points. Thank you for listening to me for an hour and 20 minutes. Next time I'll try to make it a little punchier. This is the marketing plan and strategy. That'll be the next one I do, probably tomorrow night or some point. I am going to turn this off, figure out how to post it and make it private, and then hopefully all of you guys can see it. David probably are not going to be able to see the whole thing. It really sucks. Oh well. Yeah, if you guys have any questions or anything, just feel free to ask, and then we'll go from there. Yeah, it's good talking to you guys.